The cautionary tale that captured headlines in 2004 now looks less like a clear warning about McDonald's and more like a case study in how selective framing can dominate perception. And that brings us to a logical question. If fast food really could create this level of health collapse in a matter of weeks, surely others trying the same experiment would show the same catastrophic results. Yet, when researchers and independent critics repeated his 30-day plan, their bodies didn't respond in nearly the same way. That discrepancy became one of the strongest challenges to the credibility of Spurlock's story. Replication attempts that didn't stack up. If the health effects Spurlock portrayed truly reflected what anyone would face after a month of fast food, then others repeating that experiment should have reached the same outcomes. The idea was simple: 30 days, 3 meals, no outside food, and acceptance of larger portions when offered. Yet when people tried it in the years that followed, their experiences didn't align with the crisis depicted in the film. Some gained a few pounds, most reported feeling sluggish, but the catastrophic bloodwork and dramatic health breakdowns Spurlock presented were never duplicated. What emerged instead was a patchwork of outcomes, none approaching the severity that made Super Size Me such a sensation. One of the most important replications came from researchers in Sweden at Linköping University. In 2006, they enrolled 7 healthy medical students who agreed to eat exclusively fast food for 4 weeks. To mirror Spurlock's sedentary lifestyle, they were even provided free bus passes to discourage any extra exercise. Throughout the study, participants checked in with doctors, logged their meals, and had blood drawn to track markers like cholesterol and liver enzyme. The results were far less dramatic than Spurlock's narrative. Yes, the students gained weight, on average about 6 to 12 pounds, and several reported feeling more tired than usual. But their cholesterol rose only modestly, and none suffered the kind of severe liver issues that had been portrayed in the film. The Swedish team noted that there were changes worth monitoring, but they were the kinds of changes expected when healthy young adults suddenly overeat processed foods, not signs of imminent organ damage. For critics of Spurlock's claims, the Swedish study stood out as the clearest scientific signal that his body's reaction was not typical. The contrast between Spurlock's claim of near liver failure and the Swedish group's mild abnormalities raised a lingering question. Why did his health spiral so much faster? Some researchers speculated that his pre-experiment diet may have shaped his response. At the time, Spurlock described himself as living with his vegan girlfriend and keeping a relatively clean diet before switching cold turkey into fast food excess. That shift from plant-based to heavy, greasy, high-calorie foods could have compounded the shock his body experienced. Baseline health plays a measurable role in how people react to dietary stress. Starting from one extreme and swinging to another makes an outcome less representative of what might happen to the average person making similar changes. Outside academic settings, less formal replications also challenged the film's credibility. In 2009, comedian and former health writer Tom Naughton released the documentary Fat Head as a direct rebuttal. Naughton ate nothing but fast food for a month, carefully tracking his portions and caloric intake. His approach was not eat everything in sight, but rather prove you can manage nutrition even from a fast food counter. The results completely diverged from Spurlock's. Naughton lost weight, reduced his body fat, and saw slight improvements in cholesterol. His experiment demonstrated a basic but crucial point: calories matter more than the restaurant logo on the bag. Without letting portions spiral upward, eating from fast food menus did not automatically trigger collapse. Another example came from John Cisna, an Iowa science teacher who gained media attention in 2014 for his own 30-day McDonald's-only diet. With the help of his students, Cisna designed his meals to stay near 2,000 calories per day, modeling the government's nutritional guidelines. He exercised moderately and tracked his health throughout. At the end, Cisna reported losing about 37 pounds over several months, with lowered cholesterol and improved blood pressure. Though critics pointed out that he deliberately controlled portions in ways Spurlock did not, his experiment underscored how dramatically outcome depends on calorie balance rather than brand-specific toxicity. Cisna's story entered the public conversation less as a definitive counterpoint than as an example of how nutrition choices within the same restaurant chain could produce opposite results. Taken together, these cases illustrate a broader truth. Replication attempts failed to reproduce the dramatic collapse shown on film. They didn't prove fast food was healthy, but they did show that a month of exclusive McDonald's eating did not automatically push people into depression, extreme cholesterol spikes, or liver damage. The weight gain and fatigue participants reported fit the expected pattern of overconsumption, but the more frightening results Spurlock emphasized, shakes, mood crashes, and organ stress, remained unique to his account. That gap made clear that something about his personal context, not the McDonald's menu alone, likely drove the story. Even so, audiences should be cautious not to swing to another extreme. These replications don't suggest that a fast food diet is harmless. Overeating fries and burgers day after day still increases risks for weight gain, high sodium exposure, and long-term metabolic issues. What they highlight is that Spurlock exaggerated the short-term consequences for dramatic effect. Instead of 30 days proving catastrophic by default, what the evidence shows is a range of reactions. Mild strain for some, modest improvements for others under calorie control, and nothing consistently resembling medical collapse. It's also essential to understand how personal history shapes reaction to diet changes. Someone with a background of lower calorie intake or specific health conditions might experience sharper effects from overeating in a sudden shift. That perspective aligns with speculation that Spurlock's baseline diet made his switch to McDonald's uniquely difficult for his body. Variability isn't just possible, it's expected when personal histories differ. Controlled conditions help smooth out these factors, but Spurlock's experiment was never controlled. It was billed as entertainment and presented with selective editing that amplified the most shocking outcomes. The replication attempts also exposed another issue: transparency. The Swedish experiment published menus and blood data. Naughton and Sisner recorded calorie totals and kept open documentation. By contrast, Spurlock declined to release his own food log. Without logs, researchers couldn't replay his choices meal for meal, and that made verification impossible. In a sense, Spurlock's story stood alone because it was left unverifiable. Replication made it clear. Outcomes vary when conditions vary, but there was no honest method to demonstrate that his precise descent could be repeated. So what we are left with is a pattern. Fast food-only diets tested under different strategies consistently produced logical results tied to portion size and energy balance. Weight gain if calories increased, weight stability or loss if calories were controlled. What they did not produce, despite repeated trials, was the kind of acute organ damage and psychological crash that dominated the film's narrative. And that inconsistency shifts attention away from the restaurants themselves and toward the individual factors that could make one person react far more intensely than others. Which brings us back to Spurlock's personal health. If independent studies with documented menus and blood work found only mild disturbances, then his own liver alarm and mood swings suggest outside variables that never appeared on screen. Looking more closely at those missing details provides a different lens on what might really have been happening during those 30 days. And it is in that missing context that the most significant challenge to the story emerges. The missing context of alcohol, one of the most crucial details shaping how audiences interpreted Super Size Me, was Morgan Spurlock's insistence that alcohol was not part of his 30-day project. On camera, he told his doctors that he didn't drink, presenting himself as a healthy baseline subject whose only upcoming change would be a diet made entirely of McDonald's meals. This mattered for the experiment's framing because it implied that every health change captured on film, from rising cholesterol to mood crashes, could only be tied to fast food. By eliminating alcohol, smoking, or underlying conditions from the picture, Spurlock narrowed the story to a single cause and effect relationship: McDonald's food as the sole driver of his decline. That narrative collapsed years later. In December 2017, Spurlock published a public confession in which he admitted to decades of sustained alcohol abuse. His words were unambiguous. He had been consistently drinking since the age of 13, and in his own account, he hadn't been sober for more than a week in 30 years. For audiences who remembered his claim of being alcohol-free during Super Size Me this revelation changed the context entirely. It did not only contradict the way he had presented himself to doctors on screen, it also introduced a major variable that could explain many of the very health issues highlighted in the documentary. Alcohol's role in liver health is well documented. Heavy, long-term drinking is one of the most common causes of elevated liver enzymes, fatty liver disease, and inflammation. These changes do not develop in a few weeks of fast food consumption. They accumulate across years of consistent alcohol use. From that perspective, the film's claim that 30 days of burgers and fries pushed Spurlock's liver into dangerous territory now looks incomplete. His blood test numbers may have reflected damage already developing over decades of drinking. When the documentary isolated McDonald as the only possible culprit, it ignored a far more established medical explanation. This context also reshapes how viewers interpret one of the film's most unsettling moments, when a doctor tells Spurlock that his liver test results look like those of a person struggling with alcoholism. At the time, this comment was framed as evidence of just how toxic supersized meals could be. But with Spurlock's later admission, the explanation appears much simpler. The resemblance existed because alcohol had in fact been a constant part of his life. Instead of proving that 30 days of Big Macs could mimic years of alcohol damage, what those numbers may really show is fast food layered on top of an already compromised system. The symptoms Spurlock experienced throughout the film take on a new light as well. His shakes, mood swings, night sweats, and agitation were shown as the inevitable effects of deep-frying his body in fast food. Yet many of those same symptoms are also associated with alcohol withdrawal. Medical literature explains that when someone with long-term dependence suddenly reduces or cuts intake, the body reacts with tremors, anxiety, irritability, and fatigue. In severe cases, withdrawal even becomes life-threatening. Even if Spurlock did not fully abstain, changes in his drinking pattern during filming could have created withdrawal-like effects. Seen in this light, the sequences showcasing his low mood and jittery behavior might not have been unique food-driven consequences at all, but signs of an unacknowledged, underlying dependency. Audiences believed the story in 2004 because it reinforced cultural anxieties about fast food. When he appeared to unravel physically and emotionally in the span of 30 days, it confirmed worries about portion sizes, obesity, and processed diets. But once Spurlock acknowledged alcoholism, the simplicity of that story fell apart. What viewers had accepted as proof that McDonald's could dismantle a healthy body in weeks was, at best, an incomplete picture. His decline may have stemmed not only from diet, but also from subtracting or altering a substance he had relied on nearly every day for 3 decades. The omission matters because it transformed how the film was received. As presented, Super Size Me looked like a clean demonstration, one healthy man, one dramatic change, one undeniable outcome. In reality, the baseline Spurlock claimed for himself never existed. His decades of alcohol use made him an atypical subject long before the experiment began. By withholding that background, he ensured that the movie's health scares would be interpreted as fast food's fault, rather than as the predictable vulnerabilities of someone with chronic risk factors already in place. This inconsistency also explains why replication attempts failed to reproduce his collapse. When Swedish researchers ran a controlled fast food diet and saw mild weight gain but not severe liver damage, it wasn't because their experiment was flawed. It was because their participants did not have the same hidden context Spurlock carried into his own trial. When critics like Tom Naughton tracked their calories and maintained stable health, the difference may again come down to pre-existing conditions that Spurlock never disclosed. Without transparency about alcohol, his case could never be fairly compared to theirs. Health professionals looking back on the movie after Spurlock's admission were unsurprised. Many had voiced suspicions years earlier that his liver enzyme spikes seemed unusually rapid. Medical norms suggest that diet changes alone, even very aggressive ones, rarely create such dramatic shifts in just weeks. With alcohol placed back into the picture, those anomalies make far more sense. The damage does not need to be explained entirely by food when heavy drinking already provides a well-established pathway. Likewise, withdrawal provides a ready-made interpretation for tremors and mood swings. These are not speculative leaps. They are well-known patterns in medicine that offer a clearer context than fast food on its own ever could. That clarification also makes the editing choices of Super Size Me more glaring. The film amplified every symptom as if it were a revelation about McDonald's, omitting any consideration of alternate causes. but alternate causes were present all along. By removing alcohol from the narrative, Spurlock made the results seem shocking. With alcohol reinserted, the same footage looks less like groundbreaking proof of food dangers and more like a misattributed set of symptoms shaped by long-term dependency. The admission in 2017 did more than undercut the documentary's credibility. It reshaped its meaning. Instead of documenting the unique dangers of fast food, Super Size Me stands today as a case study in the risks of omission. By presenting incomplete information, it created a chain of conclusions that millions accepted as truth. The story functioned as entertainment, but its foundation had less to do with science and more to do with carefully curated presentation. In short, the absence of alcohol in his narrative created an illusion of certainty that misled viewers about what his health results could actually prove. The reinterpretation does not excuse the risks of overconsumption. Calories, fats, and sodium in fast food can steadily harm long-term health, and no outside factor erases that reality. But when cause and effect was attributed entirely to McDonald's in 2004, the omission of Spurlock's alcohol history skewed perception. What viewers assumed was a controlled dietary experiment now looks like an uncontrolled mix of variables. Food excess, heavy drinking, and possible withdrawal, edited together into a single exaggerated storyline. When audiences revisit Super Size Me * today with this knowledge, the transformation is striking. The same footage that once seemed to demonstrate the perils of supersized sodas now reads as a portrait of a filmmaker omitting core truths about himself. The cautionary tale holds, but it's a caution about methodology and honesty as much as about eating habits. Instead of standing as definitive proof that Big Macs can collapse a body in 30 days, it illustrates how selective context can turn personal struggles into a cultural narrative. This missing context about alcohol not only shifted how critics saw the film, but also complicated how McDonald's found itself framed in the aftermath. Viewers blamed the chain for a medical outcome that may not have been solely its doing, yet the company still faced the cultural fallout as though it were. How McDonald's chose to respond to that moment became a story of its own, one that revealed how corporations manage perception when a documentary threatens their brand. McDonald's response, spin or strategy? When Super Size Me * cast McDonald's as the symbol of unhealthy eating, the company faced more than a short-lived PR nuisance. It faced a global story that stuck. Newspapers, television commentators, and classroom teachers used the film as proof that the fast food giant was contributing to an obesity crisis. Rather than remain silent, McDonald's mounted a direct response, one designed not only to push back against Spurlock's claims, but also to present itself as responsible and pragmatic in the face of criticism. The company's actions in 2004 revealed a strategy built around two central moves: public advertising that reframed the debate and a high-profile decision about its own menu. The first move played out in print. McDonald's purchased full-page space in major British newspapers and used the ads to acknowledge parts of Spurlock's message while challenging the rest. The wording was notable for its deliberate tone. What may surprise you is how much of the film we agree with. By agreeing with broad points about overeating and lack of exercise being unhealthy, McDonald's positioned itself as reasonable. But the ads went further, criticizing the film for portraying behavior that no ordinary customer would replicate. To put that into perspective, the company calculated that Spurlock ate in 30 days the equivalent of what it would take a typical McDonald's patron years to consume. In other words, McDonald's accepted the obvious science that excessive calories cause problems, while framing Spurlock's routine as a stunt, not a fair test of real-world eating. This blend of concession and critique helped the company appear transparent without conceding its reputation entirely. The second, more visible move was a menu change. In March 2004, McDonald's announced the removal of the supersize option for drinks and fries. Officially, the company attributed the decision to menu simplification. That explanation suggested an effort to streamline operations rather than a reaction to negative publicity. But because the change came so soon after Super Size Me * made oversized portions infamous, it was hard for observers not to interpret it as a response to the film's spotlight on excess. For reporters, the timing offered a tangible sign that the documentary had influence, even if McDonald's refused to admit it directly. The chain rid itself of its most criticized product, but claimed it was simply housekeeping. The simplification story, however, was harder to sustain as years went on. McDonald's menu didn't shrink, it grew.